back, Year 5. Today we'll be reading Chapter 10 of Fantastic Mr. Fox, and our focus for this entire week is going to be retelling of stories or parts of stories. Today, our specific learning intention is to sequence the events from a portion of a longer text. So that means we're just sequencing the events from one chapter of a book that's made up of many chapters. The reason we're doing this is because when you can sequence the events of a text, it makes it much easier to then retell what happened because all you have to do is piece together those key events. Just in case, on some off chance you forgot what sequencing means, it just means putting something in order. So when we say we're going to sequence the events of a story, we just mean we're taking the things that happened in the story and putting them in the order that they happened. So here on your screen right now, you should be seeing a timeline, a vertical timeline, that would help us to organize the events of a story. Something very important to keep in mind when we're sequencing events from a story is that you only want to focus on the important events, the key or main events. You're not going to focus on little details. Let me show you why. So let's use the example of a morning routine, getting ready for school. Let's say you were going to tell somebody what you do to get ready for school in the morning. Now, chances are you're not going to take more than a minute or two to tell them what you do in the morning. However, it could probably take you over an hour to get ready in the morning, so you're summing up all those events that take place over about an hour into just 1 minute. And the way you do that is by focusing only on the most important things. So take a look at this image. Around it are a bunch of events that take place for this character in the morning. Not all of them are very important. If you were that character and you had to tell somebody what you did that morning to get ready for school, so you're retelling what you did, which of those events would you include? And which ones would you get rid of? Go ahead and pause the video for a moment, read through those different events, and decide which of them you would cross out. Alright, so let's have a quick look through these. Remember, we're trying to focus on the parts that are important. What would you feel the need to include if you were telling someone about your morning routine? 1. Wake up and make the bed. Take a shower. Yawn a couple times. Brush teeth. Get dressed. Make sure my shoes are shiny. Make breakfast. Look out the window. Wait for the bus. Count the cars that pass. Now, when I'm deciding which events are the most important, I have to think, well, which of them are absolutely necessary in this process of getting ready for school, because that's what this whole thing is about. And right away, I can tell which ones I can cross out. The events that are not very important when it comes to getting ready for school are yawning a couple times, making sure my shoes are tidy, looking out the window, and counting the cars that pass. Because getting ready for school can take place without these things. These were just extra events that probably do take place and quite often, but just aren't that important. It's the same thing when we read a story. The author is going to include a lot of details that make the story interesting and say help move the story along, but they're not super important when it comes to just retelling the gist or the most important part of the story. So today, as we read the next chapter of Fantastic Mr. Fox, let's look out for what's most important. Just a quick recap. The foxes have been stuck underground in their tunnel for over 3 days now because the farmers are waiting for them to try and make a run for it. So at this point, Mr. Fox just came up with a new plan, but he said it involves more digging, and Mrs. Fox is too tired, so the small foxes are going to help. Let's see what happens. Chapter 10. Boggis's Chicken House Number 1. This time we must go in a very special direction, said Mr. Fox, pointing sideways and downward. So he and his 4 children started to dig once again. The work went much more slowly now, yet they kept at it with great courage, and little by little the tunnel began to grow. Dad, I wish you would tell us where we are going, said one of the children. I dare not do that, said Mr. Fox, because this place I am hoping to get to is so marvelous that if I described it to you now you would go crazy with excitement. And then, if we fail to get there, which is very possible, you would die of disappointment. I don't want to raise your hopes too much, my darlings. For a long time they kept on digging. For how long they did not know, because there were no days and no nights down there in the murky tunnel. But at last Mr. Fox gave the order to stop. I think, he said, We had better take a peep upstairs now and see where we are. I know where I want to be, but I can't possibly be sure we're anywhere near it." Slowly, wearily, the foxes began to slope the tunnel up towards the surface. Up and up it went, until suddenly they came to something hard above their heads, and they couldn't go up any further. Mr. Fox reached up to examine this hard thing. "It's wood!" he whispered. "Wooden planks!" "What does that mean, Dad?" "It means, unless I'm very much mistaken, that we are right underneath somebody's house," whispered Mr. Fox. "Be very quiet now while I take a peek." Carefully, Mr. Fox began pushing up one of the floorboards. The board creaked most terribly, and they all ducked down, waiting for something awful to happen. Nothing did. So Mr. Fox pushed up a second board, and then, very, very cautiously, he poked his head up through the gap. He let out a shriek of excitement. "I've done it!" he yelled. "I've done it first time! I've done it! I've done it!" He pulled himself up through the gap in the floor and started prancing and dancing with joy. "Come on up!" he sang out. "Come up and see where you are, my darlings. What a sight for a hungry fox! Hallelujah! Hooray! Hooray!" The four small foxes scrambled up out of the tunnel, and what a fantastic sight it was that now met their eyes. They were in a huge shed, and the whole place was teeming with chickens. There were white chickens and brown chickens and black chickens by the thousand. "Baucus's chicken house #1!" cried Mr. Fox. "It's exactly what I was aiming at. I hit it slap in the middle, first time. Isn't that fantastic? And if I may say so, rather clever." The small foxes went wild with excitement. They started running around in all directions, chasing the stupid chickens. "Wait!" ordered Mr. Fox. "Don't lose your heads. Stand back. Calm down. Let's do this properly. First of all, everyone have a drink of water." They all ran over to the chicken's drinking trough and lapped up the lovely cool water. Then Mr. Fox chose 3 of the plumpest hens, and with a clever flick of his jaw, he killed them instantly. "Back to the tunnel," he ordered. "Come on, no fooling around. The quicker you move, the quicker you shall have something to eat." One after another they climbed down through the hole in the floor, and soon they were all standing once again in the dark tunnel. Mr. Fox reached up and pulled the floorboards back into place. He did this with great care. He did it so that no one could tell they had ever been moved. "My son," he said, giving the 3 plump hens to the biggest of his 4 small children, "run back with these to your mother. Tell her to prepare a feast. Tell her the rest of us will be along in a jiffy, as soon as we have made a few other little arrangements." And that takes us to the end of chapter 10. What do you think Mr. Fox has planned now? Well, write your prediction down below, but we need to move on to our independent work. As you can see on the screen, your independent work is to map out the key events of this chapter. Keep in mind the topic. Don't include small details. Focus on the bigger events. I've put the topic along the top in green to help guide you. It says, "Mr. Fox and the small foxes break into Bogus's chicken house #1." That's what the whole chapter was about. However, when you're doing a retell, you retell the events. So it's not just a summary, you're actually sharing what took place, like first, next, then last. All of your events that you include should relate directly to this topic because that's what the chapter was mostly about. So, notice I've given you 5 different boxes there. That doesn't mean you must do exactly 5. If you come up with a little more, that's okay. If you come up with only 4, that's okay. However, you want to keep it roughly around 5. The reason for that is that if you give too many events, let's say you were to do 10 different events, you're probably giving too much detail. And if you were only to do, say, 2, you're probably not giving enough. When you create this graphic organizer in your notebook, some great ways to start the sentences for each event are at the start of the chapter, then, after that, later, and at the end of the chapter. That will just help make sure that you're telling the events in order or in a sequence. Of course, I want your book to be nice and neat, and I want you to take a picture of your work when you're done with it. As always, stay safe, and I'll see you soon.